In Tidewater, Virginia, nurtured by the Chesapeake Bay and nestled between the Potomac and Rappahannock rivers, lies the county of Stafford. Sitting astride the roads and rails that stretch from Maine to Florida, Stafford County lies just 40 miles from the nation's capital that its resources help to build.
It is a hub for business growth and development.
A very high technology area.
Situated between two major cities.
And then also farmland.
The universities are excellent.
Quality school system.
We have it all here in Stafford County.
I love that about Stafford.
For 3.5 centuries, Stafford's history has been one of struggle and of survival. A history that mirrors the hardships and the successes of the nation. Long before there was a county called Stafford, the Native American tribe known as the Potomac roamed this land, settling along its rivers and coastal areas. One of the first English explorers to see these villages with their defensive palisades was Captain John Smith, who ventured up the Rappahannock and Potomac rivers and Aquia Creek in 1608 for exploration.
We believe you are a people come from under the world to take our world away from us.
It was here a little later, at the tip of what is now called Indian Point, that the beautiful young Indian princess Pocahontas was taken prisoner by a British sea captain.
A messenger forthwith was sent to her father, that his daughter Pocahontas he loved so dearly, he must ransom. Ralph Hamer.
By 1664, English settlements were spreading, and the boundaries of the newly created county of Stafford were officially established. The first permanent English settlers in Stafford had been the Brents, a family who built a plantation called Peace. Colonel Giles Brent, a Catholic who had fled from England, made the Indian princess Kitimakund his wife. Such a marriage made relations with their Indian neighbors indeed peaceful, for a time. A nephew and land speculator, George Brent, also helped to lay the foundation for new ideas of liberty. Being Catholic, he petitioned for and received from King James II a grant of religious freedom on his lands. Freedom to choose one's own religion was such a radical idea in a colony controlled by the Church of England that a crucifix sitting beside Route 1 in today's Stafford County memorializes it. Here lie the seeds of America's tradition of freedom of religion, an ideal that would become a core part of our Constitution and Bill of Rights. As in other parts of the continent, the English were beginning to carve up the land and turn its forests into settlements. The Potomac were offering them support, introducing crops and techniques new to the settlers, teaching them how to cultivate corn, beans, tobacco, and other crops, and sharing their age-old fishing techniques. Many of the Potomac became servants in the English households, eventually intermarrying with the settlers. While the Potomac were a peaceful people, relations between the Indians and settlers were not always harmonious. They even became violent when the English, feeling threatened, burned some Indian villages and killed their people. The militia did not harm those living in English homes. By 1670, as colonists cleared more and more land for tobacco and wheat, many of the remaining Potomac people were forced from the area and pushed westward. Some of them intermarried with the English and remained in the White Oak area of Stafford. Many of their descendants still live there today. While they have moved on into the 21st century, they still honor the traditions of their ancestors. It did not take the English settlers long to understand the commercial value of the area's resources.
There is an herb called upperwalk. Its leaves are dried, made into powder, and then smoked, opening all the pores and passages of the body. By this means, the natives keep in excellent health. Thomas Harriot.
Europeans couldn't get enough, and tobacco became a cash crop, dominating the early economies of Virginia and North Carolina. Tobacco was used as money. Great tobacco warehouses containing hundreds of huge barrels of tobacco, called hogsheads, sprang up along the Rappahannock Riverlands. Falmouth in South Stafford became an official inspection station for tobacco being shipped across the Atlantic Ocean. The once tiny crossroads became a bustling center for the tobacco trade in the area. Traders and farmers prospered. As trade grew, money flowed and some families grew wealthy, showing off their status by the grandness of their estates. Communities displayed wealth through buildings like the exquisite Georgian structure of Aquia Church, completed in 1758. The cost of construction? 153,920 pounds of tobacco. The wealth that flowed from the tobacco trade by no means washed over all of those who lived and worked in Stafford County. Many citizens toiled away on small, hardscrabble farms. Others labored without profit as indentured servants or slaves. In fact, much of this tobacco economy was built on the shoulders of slaves, as it was throughout the South. The first enslaved Africans had been brought to Virginia in the early 1600s. Once free people, they were now viewed as property.
I, Bethlehem Berryman of Stafford County, do sell the following 13 Negroes: James, Anthony, Jane, Cato, Beck, Harry.
While tobacco may have been king, other industries sprang up in 18th century Stafford, notably the production of iron. There was, for instance, the Accokeek Iron Furnace. Its managing partner was Augustine Washington, owner of an estate now known as Ferry Farm. Augustine's son, George Washington, spent his formative years at Ferry Farm, a successful plantation on the Stafford side of the Rappahannock River.
One of the most agreeable situations for a house that is to be found upon the whole river, having a clear and distinct view of almost every house in Fredericksburg and every vessel that passes to and from it. George Washington.
And then adversity struck. George lost his new baby sister. Shortly after, the Washington home caught fire and had to be repaired. Then in 1743, when George was only 11, his father died, and his mother Mary was left with 5 children to raise. Despite her husband's death, she was dedicated to keeping her family afloat and improving their prospects. Augustine's death eliminated plans for a formal education of the Washington children, but Mary did her utmost to continue George's education, including the social graces and skills expected of a gentleman. His knack for mathematics allowed him to earn an income as a surveyor until he was old enough to become a planter. George Washington overcame his early adversity to reach success as a surveyor, a military leader, and the new country's first president. And it was here, along the banks of the Rappahannock in Stafford County, that this extraordinary and essential figure in our nation's history grew to manhood. As the revolution that Washington helped to lead grew in strength, others from Stafford helped to shape the newly emerging nation. John Francis Mercer and George Mason IV were educated here at Marlborough Plantation, which housed the second largest library in Virginia. Mason would come to author the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which was the basis of America's Bill of Rights.
All men are by nature equally free and independent and have certain inherent rights, namely, the enjoyment of life and liberty. George Mason.
Mercer, Mason, and Washington. 3 men who studied as boys in Stafford would in later years attend the Constitutional Convention that helped shape the nation. With the American Revolution brewing, colonial troops needed weapons, munitions, supplies. Near Falmouth stood James Hunter's iron foundry, with a production capacity that could help meet the need. With a workforce that included several hundred free and enslaved workers, this factory fed the military needs of the American Revolution.
From Mr. Hunter's ironworks, every camp kettle has been supplied for the Continental and all other troops employed in this state, besides the number of new muskets and bayonets made there. And without these works, we have no other resource for these articles. James Mercer.
Following independence from England, Stafford County and its natural resources continued contributing to the newfound country.
The stone is exceedingly good and free from iron ore and clay holes. The material is a yellowish sandstone of fine grain, finer than the sandstone used in Rome. Benjamin Latrobe.
Construction of the capital city in Washington, D.C. took decades. Much of the sandstone used there was cut from this place, now called Government Island, and other quarries in the hills overlooking Aquia Creek. Visitors today can still tour the quarry and see the site where the stone was cut that helped build the nation's capital and its most notable structures. Beginning with the tobacco trade, along with the mills, foundries, quarries, factories, and farms, slave labor had become the foundation of much of the Southern economy. Not all citizens of Stafford County accepted this slave culture. Moncure Conway, who grew up here in Falmouth, was a notable exception. Studying for the ministry in New England, he developed strong anti-slavery feelings. When his family's slaves fled to freedom during the Civil War, Conway helped escort them through the slave state of Maryland to safety in Ohio.
As long as one man is a slave in this land, we are all slaves. Moncure Conway.
Another Stafford-born man and rebel against slavery was Anthony Burns. Born a slave, Burns escaped at the age of 19 and made his way to Boston, Massachusetts in 1853. Discovered there and arrested, he was brought to trial in Boston under the Fugitive Slave Act, which recognized slaves as personal property. Despite the support of a crowd of 50,000, Burns was convicted and returned to slavery in Virginia. He was later freed, went to college, and became a minister. The suffering of slaves here, as throughout the South, continued until the coming of Civil War. The Civil War tore apart the country and Stafford County as well. Stafford men would serve and fall in battlefields throughout the South and North, and troops from other states would fight and struggle here. Chatham and many other Stafford buildings were turned into hospitals and surgeries. Civilians like Clara Barton and poet Walt Whitman labored to comfort or save as many as they could. Soldiers suffered from the muddy and wintry weather, as well as from the wounds of war.
Almost benumbed with cold, overcome with fatigue and loss of sleep, I wrapped myself in my blanket and lay down in the cold mud and running water. I waked up, almost frozen, scarcely able to move. Union soldier.
This winter is, indeed, the Valley Forge of the war. Lieutenant Colonel Rufus R. Dawes.
First, the Confederates had occupied Stafford, and now the Union Army camped and built warehouses, shipping docks, and supply depots throughout the area, absorbing local resources for its military needs.
This vast army, pushing out and out and out through field and forest, swept over the country. Union soldier.
Before and after the bloody battles on the fields of Fredericksburg, President Lincoln made 6 separate visits to Stafford for a total of 14 days. Even in the midst of huge grand reviews of troops, many a soldier felt a close connection with the president and noted the impact of the war on his face.
Thank you for your hard work. Thank you. Thank you.
The Union Army occupation meant freedom for thousands of slaves. Even before the Emancipation Proclamation, escaped slaves had begun crossing the Rappahannock to find their freedom behind Union lines.
It would astonish you if you should see the number of Negroes running around ours and all the other camps in this vicinity. They come across the river in boats to get away from their masters. Union soldier.
My heart gave a great leap for joy. I was soon once more in the Union lines. I found the soldiers encamped for miles around, awaiting to receive their living cargoes. John Washington.
With occupation by 2 armies, the Civil War had laid waste to Stafford County. Physically, economically, socially, the war left a mark on Stafford, like much of the South, that would take decades to repair.
The village itself was a ruin. Its church used as a barracks for troops. Its stores and factories closed. Union soldier.
Slowly, from the start of the 20th century, life in Stafford began to improve. Artistry and scientific experimentation emerged. Even before the Wright brothers, Samuel Pierpont Langley attempted flights from Stafford shores. And cultural enrichments began to change the character of the county. The voices of Stafford County spoke in pictures as well as words.
Nothing matters in this world to the painter but a good picture. And it must be a mighty good one to compete with those already done. Gary Melchers.
In 1916, artist Gary Melchers, acclaimed both in European and New York art circles, purchased Belmont. In addition to his commissioned work, he painted the people and the places he saw around him in Falmouth, preserving a visual record of the village as it was in 1916 through 1930. At this same time, Stafford-born artist Palmer Hayden, a veteran of the famed Buffalo Soldiers Army Unit, was joining what came to be known as the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s and 30s. His focus was painting the ordinary experience and important contributions of blacks in America with his primitive but expressive style. At times, that style would return to embrace the people, places, and culture of Stafford County. As the 20th century progressed, Stafford, like all America, endured the hardships of a Great Depression and 2 world wars. Through it all, Stafford's people and culture continued to evolve in their own unique direction.
At Quantico, the Marines demonstrate the latest vehicle for amphibious warfare. They're off and away in less than a minute.
At the same time, the county lost 1/5 of its northern territory for the new Marine Corps base at Quantico. To make room for the base, the federal government acquired land, displaced families, and moved whole communities, all with just 21 days' notice.
People didn't have time to get out. They got a very low price on land. It left people with nowhere to go. French homes.
But America was at war, and many in Stafford answered the call of duty.
I went through the last war, and if they need my farm to get through this war, then they can have it. William Weedon Clough.
Today, Stafford County has a strong record of supporting defense-related business and industry. Although Civil War brought an end to slavery, laws and customs continued to mark distinctions between the races for another century and more. Black and white races were educated separately. In 1939, during the Great Depression, the Stafford Training School rose as the only African-American high school in Stafford County during the era of segregation. In August 1960, 5 young seniors from the all-black H.H. Poole School attempted to enroll in the all-white Stafford High School. While unsuccessful, they paved the way for 2 sisters in 1961 to enter the all-white Stafford Elementary School, making Stafford the first school system in the area to integrate. The story of Stafford County is truly a story of struggle and survival. Stafford's people can look back on 350 years of turbulence, change, and success, and see that their lives have been shaped in many ways by those who came before. Today's Stafford is rooted in America's earliest ideas of freedom, education, individual rights, relationship of state and nation. These ideas take modern form in Stafford's own institutions of learning, business, healthcare, cultural life, family relationships. Inspired by these ideas, Stafford is now home to thousands of quality businesses and some of Virginia's finest schools, an enviable and integral part of the National Capital Region. Through 350 years, events in Stafford County have influenced the direction our country grew and reflected the evolution of America itself.